All right. Can you believe we're in September of 2020? Isn't that crazy? I wonder what fun September will bring us. Hasn't this year just been loads of fun? I recently heard that the year 2020 is not only going to be remembered in history for what went down, but it's actually the most recent certified, the number now, 2020, when you say 2020, is the most recent certified swear word in the dictionary as well. So I better not hear you guys using 2020 as a swear word. That better not happen. But it's been a wacky at best, right? And just downright painful at worst, full of pain and suffering. But let's be honest for a second. Life is full of suffering. Life was full of suffering long before 2020. We knew pain and loss before 2020. It was just a different form. 2020 has been a unique form of pain and loss, but we've known the intensity of this suffering, right? This isn't new to us. We're not the most suffered generation. This isn't the worst year ever, because if we're honest, suffering is a part of life, right? If you're going to make sense of life, you have to come to terms with and make sense of suffering, right? In fact, one of the biggest hangups for people before they put their faith in Jesus Christ is the prominence of suffering in our world. That's one of the biggest hurdles that people have to jump when they come to faith in God. And you've probably heard this question asked before, and maybe you asked it before, or maybe you're asking it right now. And that is this question: if there is a God and he is good, why doesn't he intervene and end our suffering? You ever heard that question? Sure, you've heard that question. Surely a good and loving God wouldn't stand idle in the midst of life's most horrific and most disastrous tragedies. Surely if God loved me like he said he loved me, then he wouldn't stand by passive as I suffer. Surely he would step in and do something, right? If he has the power to do it, and if he loves me, why isn't he intervening in my suffering? The issue of suffering is more than just a human issue, right? This is an issue of faith. This is really a God issue, the issue of suffering. Every world religion has an approach to suffering. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but not just the organized religions that you think about, but every worldview. Even nowadays, which we call that religion secularism, maybe some would say humanism, which is kind of just a detachment from religion. Even that worldview or that thought has something to say about suffering, because you have to, because life is full of suffering. Some say that suffering is a result of your behavior. So if you're obnoxious and rowdy and evil, then there's a one-to-one correlation between your suffering and your actions or your behavior. So that's how some religions deal with suffering. Now, there's other religions that say suffering is an honor. It's something to be proud of. It's something of a warrior. And so you embrace suffering in that religion. You pretend like it doesn't hurt you because there's value and honor, and people revere those who suffer. And so you become kind of a stoic. And even though you face suffering, you kind of act like it doesn't really bother you. You're above suffering, right? Others say that suffering shouldn't make you sad or bring you sorrow, because we all belong into this greater being. That's how some religions sum it up, that we're all a part of this greater being. And so when we endure loss and pain, we shouldn't really get too down about that, because if you think about loss and pain, we're all moving towards one greater being where we're all going to kind of be enveloped by this great being. And so suffering and loss doesn't mean the same thing, because we're not individuals suffering. But what does our faith tell us about suffering? What does the Christian faith say about your suffering? What does God say about suffering? So let's begin, and I promise I'm going to move from philosophical here into practical. But let's begin with Christianity's biggest distinction from all other worldviews, all other religions. This is it right here, that Jesus, God's very own Son, fully divine, meaning he is fully God, he became one of us and suffered. This is unique to the Christian faith, that our God suffered. This is the gospel. This is good news that God's own Son faced the most intense suffering any man could ever face, which right away discredits this belief that your suffering has to do fully with your behavior. Now, I'm not going to tell you that if you go out and you do really dumb things, that it's not going to catch up with you and there aren't going to be consequences to your sins. But Jesus suffered more than any person on earth, and Jesus lived a perfect life. So he kind of does away with that thought that our suffering is a one-to-one relationship to our behavior. Not only that, but Jesus emotively reacted to suffering. He wept in John 11, the shortest verse in the Bible, because of his friend passing away. And then in Matthew 26:39, he begs God to remove his suffering. He begs him, he says, take this away from me. So suffering is not to be ignored. It's not that it doesn't hurt. Jesus models that it does hurt. You can't ignore it. And maybe most importantly, by suffering, Jesus revealed that suffering is not even to be avoided. That's interesting, because secularism, our modern worldview, what we do with suffering in that is you try to avoid it. What you do is you build your life in order to avoid suffering. That's why you do the things you do. And this is kind of that secular worldview that is so prominent right now. But Jesus, by suffering, says it's not even to be avoided. There must be value in suffering. Otherwise, think about this. Why would Jesus, who is all-powerful, who can do whatever he wants, when faced with suffering, why wouldn't he hit that button that says exit, escape, go on, move on? If suffering didn't hold value, if it was just to be avoided, then why didn't Jesus avoid it when he was given the chance? And you might remember Jesus goes up into the wilderness right after he's baptized, and Satan basically gives him opportunities to get himself out of suffering, to use his divine power, and Jesus says no. So, if suffering isn't to be avoided, what's the Christian's relationship to it? And here's what I want to propose to you today. The secret to suffering as a Christian is this, that suffering has a gift for us. There's a gift in suffering. There are some things that we only experience as a result of our pain and our sorrow. And those things are intensely beautiful. Intensely beautiful. And I think that's why the writer of Hebrews says this about Jesus in our text for this morning. We're in the book of Hebrews, chapter 5. And this is what he says. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. In other words, he was deeply moved by the suffering he was facing. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. Look at this line again. Did you catch this line right here? Verse 8. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. This is a crazy idea, right? The perfect Son of God could learn more completely about obedience to his heavenly Father through what he suffered. In other words, there was something to be gained that even Jesus couldn't gain any other way than suffering. Isn't that a crazy thought? Something so valuable that it made suffering worth it to Jesus. And church, if suffering has something to offer Jesus, don't you believe that suffering has something to offer us as well? If Jesus can benefit, surely we can benefit. So how does suffering teach us obedience? What is it about suffering that makes us more obedient? First, I think, is that suffering teaches us, and I think my clicker is gone, Amber. Suffering teaches us trust. You see, suffering has a way of removing the safety harness of our faith. Actually, Jacob and I were just talking about this a couple minutes ago, but if you know me, I'm afraid of heights. Anybody else afraid of heights? Yeah, some of you are not telling the truth, I think. Well, let me see those hands again, because we need some work up on the roof. So I'm going to look who's not raising their hand. Okay. Above the fourth or fifth step of the ladder, I get a little nervous, and I'm really uncomfortable. But here's the crazy thing. I love to go ziplining. I love high ropes courses. I love being up in the air doing something fun like that. But here's the difference, is when you're ziplining, when you're on a high ropes course, even when you're rock climbing, you're almost always wearing a safety harness, right? I know that if my balance fails, or if I miss a step, or if I just kind of get twisted the wrong way and something were to go wrong, I will be caught by my safety equipment. And we do that in our faith too. I don't know if we recognize it, but we do the same thing. We strap on safety harnesses in our faith. We know that God provides, but we also have a really nice 401k, really nice savings, all kinds of investments just in case He doesn't. And we know that God is with us, but we're also really good at building quite the network of social support just in case we ever get in the place where we really need a real person. Right? We know that God is our joy, but we sure spend a lot of time and effort and money and energy on things that will make us happy. We know that God is enough for us, but we fill up our lives in excess stuff and excess food and excess media, and our lives are just full. And here's the thing about suffering. Suffering removes those safety harnesses. I don't know if you realize that. That's why suffering hurts, is because it takes away what's comfortable from us and it removes the safety harness. And when our backup plans are unhooked, all of a sudden we find out for real if God can be trusted. That's what's happening in the midst of suffering. The next slide says trust is more than believing God can. It's believing God will. And this is the kind of trust that is birthed out of suffering. My friend Jeff, he brought his one wheel. We have a picture of it here on the screen. When he came to visit us here the last couple of weeks, he's a friend from Chicago, and he always brings a bunch of toys with him. And this is the toy that he brought this time. You can see him riding there. That's just one go-kart wheel that this man's riding. It goes 15 miles per hour on this one wheel. And the cool thing about the one wheel is because there's only one wheel, it's really hard to balance. Well, this machine has a self-leveling mechanism in it. In other words, once you get on it and tip it up, it helps you balance. There's something in there that kicks in and it actually keeps you balanced. It's the craziest thing. So Jeff was telling me about it, and as he who owns it and has tried it before, he was showing me how it works. Of course, I believed that this machine could self-level because I was watching him do it. And I could see, and it makes sense, if you're going to go 15 miles per hour on one wheel, you're probably going to need some help balancing. So I could believe that the one wheel can self-level. But it was a whole different experience when I put my foot, you start like this with one foot on the ground, one foot up. It's a whole different experience that first time you pop it up and go to one wheel and you wait and you see if the one wheel will self-level. That's another level of trust, right? Without suffering, our trust in God is theoretical. We know He can. We believe He can. We've heard other people experience that. And this isn't bad. I'm not trying to look down on those whose trust is still in a theoretical sense, because until you suffer, that's where you're at. But once you suffer, you learn the hard way that God will come through, that He is trustworthy. You see, we have a solution for almost every problem we face as human beings until we don't. That's the thing. When the cancer diagnosis comes, when the job is gone in the midst of a pandemic, when your sister dies at a young age, when the divorce papers are served. See, these moments we don't have a solution for. There is no solution. It forces us to admit there's nothing I can do. Nothing I can do. And unfortunately, these are sometimes the only time that we actually let God do what only God can do. Unfortunately, as human beings, we are so self-sufficient that void of any suffering, we never put our weight on the promises of Jesus Christ. So suffering gives us a gift of trust, but it's not just trust. The next gift it gives is love. It's crazy how important presence is to us as human beings. Presence becomes even more important in suffering. When I think back to the most painful moments of my life, all of a sudden it's like a yearbook reel plays in my mind. When I think of the most painful moments of my life, I begin to see pictures and images of faces. I begin to see people who were present with me in my pain. Because in the midst of suffering, presence means love. Think about this for a moment. In your darkest moment, think to your darkest moment. People express love by just being with you. Just being with you. They might not have had the answers, but they were with you. They might not have been able to lessen the pain, but they were with you. They might not have been much help at all, if you're honest with yourself, because they didn't know what to do. But you were not alone. And this is the promise of Scripture again and again, that though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, I will not fear, for you are what? With me. Suffering illuminates presence. Suffering makes you aware of who is near you. And this is why it's important for us as a church to show up when people are hurting. Just to show up. You've been in those situations where you have no idea what to say to someone. Can I just tell you, show up. Just stand there. Be silent. It doesn't matter, because suffering illuminates presence. We see who is around us. And we know that God loves us because He is with us. For God so loved the world that He sent His one and only Son to be with us. The scandal of Christianity is that God is Emmanuel, God with us. The separation was too much for God. He came to be with us. And presence is a powerful communicator of love. Presence is a powerful communicator of love. In fact, often when people can't be with the person they love, if you watch closely, you'll notice that they start to accommodate for their lack of presence with other ways of loving people. A lot of times you'll see that. They'll step up in gift giving. They'll step up in words of affirmation. But when you can't be present with somebody, you notice that there's something missing in how you express love. It's just simply your presence. So suffering has a way of isolating us from those we love. This is a hard truth. Maybe we lose a loved one, or we lose a friendship, or maybe our friends are just so scared of our suffering that they distance themselves. I'm sure you've experienced that. Suffering has a way of making the gap bigger between us and our friends. But Christ has come to change that. In His presence, He recognized this dynamic of presence, and all of a sudden, the suffering that we are facing leads us to come to a recognition of this truth found in Deuteronomy. You know this verse. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. So, suffering reveals that God's presence is close. It reveals that that presence means love. So, suffering gives us the gift of love, but it's not just love of God. I like what Tim Keller says. He says that suffering gives opportunity to reorder your loves. It's another aspect of love that suffering enters into. Because only in suffering do we make effort sometimes to reprioritize how we spend our time and money and effort and love. You ever notice that? Look at the big changes in your life where you're prioritizing what you love. And most of the time, the big shifts come in moments of suffering. Very few people receive a cancer diagnosis and start working more overtime. You just don't see it. Even fewer people lose a loved one and push away from their friends and families in that moment. Suffering not only reveals that God's love for us is present, but suffering gives us the chance to reorient our love for others and for God. Ultimately, this leads to that third gift of suffering, the one the writer of Hebrews mentions that Christ received: obedience. Obedience. How did suffering teach Christ obedience? Isn't that kind of confusing? Isn't he perfect? How does suffering make Christ's obedience more complete? Was he not obedient already? There's something here that we can learn from, because I believe he was perfect and he still learned a more complete form of obedience in his suffering. Obedience that was tested and tried. Maybe that's the difference. Obedience that really had some teeth to it, because ultimately obedience that was motivated by what he found in suffering, and what I believe he found in suffering was trust and love. I'm a father of 3 kids, 3 wonderful little kids. Aren't they great? They have a good mom. That's why they're great. Here's what I realized, though. I can motivate my kids to be obedient in a bunch of different ways. And I do. Full disclosure. I can use fear. I can scare them. I can control them because they're still young. So I can actually physically control them. I can take away their privileges. I can force them. I can even manipulate them so that the only way they're going to get a certain response from me is if they obey me. That's manipulation. All of these will probably result in obedience, don't you think? You've probably seen me use these before, or you use them with somebody in your life. They can motivate, and they will result in obedience, at least for a while. As my really good friend likes to remind me, that method of parenting will work great until it doesn't. Until it doesn't. There will come an age when fear doesn't motivate my kids. There will come an age where I cannot control them. I cannot force them. And when that day comes, and hopefully long before that day comes, I want my kids to be motivated to obey for different reasons. I want them to trust me. I want to prove to them that they can trust me. I want them to do what I ask them to do because they actually believe I have what's best for them in mind. And this is the kind of trust that is developed in suffering. And if they are certain of my love for them, if my kids know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I love them for who they are and not for how they act, then guess what? They will obey as an expression of love for me. That's a really beautiful transition when you see teenagers usually make that change. Obedience becomes an act of love. So it's by suffering we learn to trust Jesus and recognize his love for us. And it's in light of these gifts that Jesus learns what the Message paraphrase calls trusting obedience. So to wrap up today, what does trusting obedience look like? What good is suffering really birthing in us? What does this look like in action? What does it look like to see somebody who's come to this beautiful place of obedience through suffering? How do they act? How do they respond? And to see that, we go back to Matthew 26:39. And Jesus is just hours away from torture and crucifixion. He is actually physically sweating blood. You think he was feeling suffering in that moment? Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and he prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup," in other words, may my circumstances, what's ahead of me, my destination, may it be taken away from me. I don't want it. Yet, not as I will, but as you will. Jesus felt the suffering. He agonized. He even prayed that God would take it away. But because he trusted God, he comes to this place of deeper obedience. And what it looks like is right here. Not my will, but yours, Lord. Not my will, but yours. This is learned obedience right here. I know you are suffering today. I know personally for many of you, I know you're suffering today. And those that I don't know, I know that this world is full of suffering. You're suffering loss of a job, loss of marriage, loss of relationship, loss of freedom, loss of influence, or even just losing that thing that you really deeply desired and is no longer available. Loss of control or safety or assurance, loss of comfort and security, and maybe you're suffering a loss of joy today. Your suffering is real. It's legitimately painful. Can I just tell you that your suffering is not to be ignored or looked past? It's certainly unpleasant. Yet, as your pastor, I want to convince you today that your suffering has a gift to offer you. If you will receive it, it's the gift of finding God faithful when you unhook from the safety harnesses and you let go of the emergency backup plans. It's the gift of deeper trust and a more intimate love. It's the gift of opportunity to reorder your loves in obedience to Christ. There's no shame in praying away your suffering. I love that about that verse. Jesus says, "Lord, take this from me." So even though it's valuable and even though it's necessary, there's no shame in praying away your suffering. Maybe the Lord will answer you in miraculous ways. You're not weak for asking God to take this cup from you. Yet there's a posture of heart, a more perfect prayer that Jesus gets to in his prayer. It's a prayer of trusting obedience that's so wonderfully modeled in Matthew. In the throes of suffering, can you pray, "Not my will, but yours"? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we know you're a good God because you don't settle for lesser things. And when we could have intimacy with you, and we can find trust and love, you see suffering as a worthy price to pay to receive those things. So God, in the midst of our suffering today, would you help us to trust you more? Would you come through when nothing else can come through? Would you show us that you're working in our lives? Would you reveal your presence to us? Would you remind us that your nearness to us in our pain is maybe the greatest act of love we could ever receive? Help us to be able to pray, not just because we think we should or because we know it's the right thing to do, but may we be so trusting and so assured of your love, that we could come to a place where in the midst of our suffering we could pray, Lord, not my will, but yours be done. And actually believe it. And actually trust that you have what's best for us in mind. God, may we not miss out on the redemptive work that you're doing in the midst of our pain. May we be people in this world who don't make little of suffering, who also don't make too much of suffering, but people in this world who come to value our suffering as a portrait of your faithfulness in this world. Help me, in the midst of my suffering, to find you as faithful and loving. May I reorder my loves to be obedient to you. I pray in your name. Amen. Amen.